Pastor Philip Suber.
Chapter 22. And here's what it says. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Verse 2 says, then he said, take now your son, listen, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. And then I want to skip down to verse 9. And it says in verse 9, then they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son and laid him on an altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took his knife to slay his son. Verse 11 says, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here am I. Verse 12 says, and he said, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Verse 13 says, then Abraham filled his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And here it is. Verse 14 says, and Abraham called the name of the place, listen, the Lord will provide. As it is said, to this day, the mount of the Lord, it shall be provided. Here's the English Standard Version says, so Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. And he goes on to say, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. But one more time, here it is in the NIV, and Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Today I want to talk to you about provisions for our progression. Provisions for our progression. Most of you have received a little card so that you can make your notes, and on the front of that card has a picture that illustrates Abraham offering up his son Isaac, who is on the altar. And just to the side of it, you'll see that there is a ram in the bush. And for many years that we have listened to sermons entitled, The Lord Will Provide. And I guess that for most folks that would be appropriate now to talk about how God will provide. I mean, it makes sense that so many people have lost their jobs, and some have lost their homes, and some have lost loved ones, leaving a void in many of our lives. It would make sense. It would be a good title to say, the Lord will provide. And I know that the Lord will provide, but I mentioned that we have grown and we have gained new perspectives and we have gained epiphanies about what the Lord is doing in our lives. That his provision is not just to keep us safe. His provision is not just that we might survive. But I've learned that God's provisions are purpose-filled. That we are progressing, we are transforming from one degree, from one mindset to another. And so for that reason, I'm saying we ought to be talking about that God's provision is for our progression, our advancement. And I recognize that when I say provision, provision has many meanings. Provision in some sense has us to look at a legal term. It is meeting specifications or requirements in order for something to unfold. But when we talk about provisions from the most popular and familiar point, we talk about give us this day our daily bread. Yeah. But today I want to talk about both, and I'm like this. I want you to digest what God is telling us, so that we won't leave here like we came, but that we will have a different mindset about why God is blessing us. If you were following my Night for Insight, one of those nights we talked about the rich fool who did not understand the purpose of his blessings. He only saw the opportunity to sit back and enjoy life. He never thought about what God was doing in his life, the fact that he was blessed with abundance. And I don't want you to think that what I'm telling you is so shallow that I'm just talking about finances. I want you to elevate your mindset. And I want you to understand that even our health, our relationship, everything that we have is a blessing from God. But there is a reason why God is blessing. There is a reason why you and I are still alive. So I want us to push back from the table for a minute. Put down your desire to say, feed me till I want no more. And ask the Lord, Lord, what will you have me to do? Here is what I found here. When we meet Abraham, who was recently Abram, who was named Abram as exalted father, we meet him more than 25 years plus in his faith walk. Many of us say that I've been walking with the Lord for a long time, and I'm glad for it. I give God praise for all that he has taught us while we've been on this journey. But we too can see that Abraham's progression has been a matter of God testing him. We read in verse 1 here in Genesis 22 that God tested Abraham. And what we need to understand is that when God tests, sometimes in some translation we'll read the word tempted. But God is not tempting. He's just proving us. He is exemplifying our faith. I do that out of habit because every time I think about God testing us, I think about a rubber band. And I think about the times when I would watch Mom when she was combing hair, and there was a way that she would take the rubber bands and twist it up. And sometime a weak rubber band would pop. But a good rubber band would last, and its elasticity would not give way. It was being tested. It was being proved. And when God is testing us, God is proving our faith. And unfortunately, God doesn't prove our faith when things are going well. But oftentimes, or in fact, times like this, during a historic pandemic, God is yet proving us. And I don't know what you have gone, I don't know how this pandemic has affected you. You may be all right, but you may have already had some testing before the pandemic. But God is just testing us, but he's testing us on purpose. He's testing us in preparation for the next stage in our lives. The first thing I want to tell you is that in order for us to get God's provision, we must recognize that there are prerequisites. There's some things that God has for us. Truth be told, we're just not ready for it right now. And God has got to work on our life. I know it's easy to say we should have done this by now. We should have had this by now. But the truth be told, the reason why we're not there yet is because we're just not ready for all that God has for us. We look at the prerequisite. Abraham had several tests leading up to this. Some tests he passed, some tests he failed. And if all of us were honest today, we can say, some tests I passed.
Yeah, yeah.
Help me, somebody. Some tests I failed. And we don't like to brag about the tests that we failed. But we like to shout about it, and that's good, about what we have passed. But it's really the test that we fail that really teaches us the most. Here's a couple of things that Abraham went through. The first test was the test of family. And Abraham passed that test with flying colors. After his father died, God told Abraham, separate yourself from your family and your kinfolk. Now, you can't take what God told Abraham and starting a mess in your family. I'm just saying that's the test God gave Abraham. And Abraham, by faith, listened to God, left the family, and followed God. Another thing that Abraham did after he left from Ur, he had another test that dealt with famine. And I'm sad to report that Abraham failed that test. Instead of waiting on God, Abraham went to Egypt. And I want to tell you that when times get rough, sometimes that's when we kind of give up on God. And Abraham, unfortunately, failed the test, caused all kind of calamity, became a liar, and all kinds of stuff. And I think many of us can testify that when we fail our tests, sometimes we get out of our character. We start saying stuff that ain't true, doing stuff we know we ought not do, going places we ought not go. But the moment that we figure out that we are outside of God's will, we always find ourselves coming back to the Lord. Abraham had another test, a test of fellowship. God had prospered Abraham and Lot, so much so that there was not enough room in the current land for both of them and their prosperity to share that land. And Abraham decided to take the low road. Abraham, rather than falling out with his nephew Lot, he allowed Lot to pick the most flourishing part of the land. Most of us, for us, we want the best thing for ourselves. We're not really keen on esteeming others above ourselves. And for that reason, a lot of our fellowships have been broken. Folk have walked off from relationship. Folk walk away from the church most of the time because we won't take the low road. We won't esteem others above ourselves. But Abraham passed that test. Abraham took the low road. And not only did Abraham pass the test of fellowship, but Abraham passed the test of a fight. Lot went down to Sodom, and there they were under attack by a number of kings who attacked a smaller number. And they stormed the place, plundered the city, took the people and their possession. But Abraham by himself, though he had soldiers and so on, he took on a number of kings by the power of God. And it was by faith that Abraham was able to overcome it. And that let me know that sometimes in life, challenges can be difficult. But if it wasn't difficult, then where would there be a call for faith? Why does a man hope for what he yet sees? What is already within his reach? God is calling us to go beyond what we see. Go beyond the norm. He is provisioning us so that we might progress. I know that we've been about safekeeping and staying low and keeping a low profile. We ought to take care of ourselves. But there are times when God calls us to come out among our comfort zone, calls us to get on the battlefield where we are outnumbered by the enemy. But how many of you know that if God is for you, that greater is he? Get me somebody. We've been up against some challenges. Some of you have been up against some financial challenges. Bills that you could not pay. Situations that you could not handle. And in your own strength, It was way above your head. But then with God, all things are yet possible. So Abraham passed the task of fighting. And not only did he pass that test, but he also passed the test of fortune, because when Abraham defeated the kings, got all the people and got all the plunder and the possessions and brought them out, the king of Solomon said, you can take the possession. But Abraham said, no, I'm not going to take that. Sometimes greed has ruined our lives. The idea that we just can't give somebody else something. That we've got to have it all to ourselves. And because we are greedy in our mind, we are unable to comprehend or hold on to anything. But you know, you've got to let go in order to truly possess. Not only did he pass that test, but then there was another test God gave him. And God had given him a promise. Abraham's really only desire was to have an heir. And God promised Abraham a son. But in the field of the test of fatherhood, help me somebody, Abraham failed that test miserably. He failed the test because he listened to his wife, Sarah, who had concocted some kind of plan to tell God what he ought to do. And I want to say to the fathers who are here today, you're not by yourself. Many fathers can say, you know, I failed the test myself. I wasn't all that I really wanted to be. But we are just progressing by the provisions of God. So when you fall, you've got to be willing to get up and start over again. Not only did he fail that, but then he passed the test of the farewell. And God told Abraham that you got to let Hagar and Ishmael go, because that's not the blessing. There's sometimes we've got to relinquish stuff in order to possess what God has for us. And I'm telling you today, if in fact you are afraid, you're afraid you're going to lose this, you're afraid you're going to lose that. Some of you are afraid because somebody's going to walk off from you. Some of you are afraid because somebody's going to take something. Some are afraid to leave their house because somebody's going to break in, but everything belongs to the Lord. There are just some things that you got to let go of. You got to let go of it because you're really not the keeper. You really don't have power to keep anything. The power lies with God. Whatever you've got, you got to remember that we're just stewards. Because everything belongs to the Lord. Here's what I want to tell you. So there's some preparation in receiving our provision. And then as we talk about preparation, the next thing that we see in text is that there is a need to position ourselves to get our provision. God tells Abraham, you got to go to a place over to Mount Moriah, or go to a mountain that I'm going to show you. And sometimes that we're waiting on God just to reign right where we are. I was thinking to myself, and we were watching the news, and they were talking about the rationing of the vaccines. And people are so afraid that they're going to miss out on it. I've heard of people leaving the state to go to another state to get the vaccine. We knew that it was a time for change to come, and people who never hit the poll got up and went to the poll. Even in adverse circumstances, even in the middle of a pandemic, we've learned that if you really want something, you can't just sit down and demand that it comes to you. You gotta get up and you gotta go get it. I guess it would have been convenient for God to say to Abraham, sit right there and I'll bring the provision to you. But God said to Abraham, you got to get up and you got to go where the blessing is. And sometimes in our preparation, in positioning ourselves, we've got to move. Text says early that morning, and I always love that whenever I read in text, early in the morning. Because it makes me think that whoever is up and acting early in the morning has something on their mind that they are determined to do. it makes me think about the cross, but hold on for just one moment. Abraham gets up early in the morning, mounts the donkey, gets the right participation. Some things you can't do by yourself. Abraham got his servants. Makes me think about getting your house in order. Some things you just can't do by yourself. I always like to say to couples, there's some things that you cannot do by yourself. Arguing, fussing, and fighting, and nothing gets done. But when you come on one accord, the Bible asks this rhetorical question, can two walk together unless they agree? Abraham mounts up, he collects some room. And I've determined that it takes a minute sometimes to position yourself. Sometimes you gotta collect some stuff. You gotta go over here, get this, get that.
Our weekly announcements. Do you want to learn more about the Bible? Wednesday night is a night for insight. Join us via Facebook or YouTube at 6 p.m.
Much prayer, much power. Join us Fridays for prayer line at noon.
Sharing the gospel has never been easier. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook and YouTube channels and then share. Our church is supported by tithes and offerings.
Ministry is supported by your faithful giving. For Strait Life in Houston, text GIVE to 832-303-8442. For the Fellowship in Dayton, text GIVE to 936-209-2436.
Thanks again for listening, and we pray that your life has been changed by our encounter today.
And don't forget about Praise in the Parking Lot this Sunday at 11 o'clock. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. We're all hyped and we're ready to praise the Lord. Until then, may God keep you. Praise in the Parking Lot is coming to the Fellowship in Dayton, Texas, February the 14th at 11 a.m. We'll continue our first and third fellowships at Strait Life at 11 a.m. All are invited. Come worship with us.